Once in a while, I get a particular craving for something, and this time it was for apple pie. I decided to go with Golden Delicious and Granny Smith for a nice balance of sweetness and tartness. Before I got onto the apples though, I went ahead and made the crust. As you can already tell from the title of this video, I made this entire pie without a recipe. My favorite style of cooking is freestyle. I'm not much of a fan of following recipes, even though recipe development really is my job and has been my job for the last however many years. They say that baking is the one form of cooking you shouldn't freestyle, as it's also technical and whatnot, but I just wanted to wing it on this occasion. I've made quite a few pies in my time as a chef, and so I had a vague idea about quantities and a baseline knowledge of the ingredients. I added flour, sugar, and a bit of salt to my food processor. The food processor speeds up the process, but of course you can do this by hand if you want to. I cut the butter up into large chunks and added that in with my flour, sugar, and salt. Let me know in the comments below, have you ever made a dish without a recipe? How did it turn out? Are you someone who prefers cooking with a recipe or without? So to make the crust, I simply blended all the ingredients together until it looked a little bit powdery and then started to come together in small clumps. It seemed like the ratio between the butter and flour was off, so I just added a bit more flour to bring it all together and again, just blended it until it resembled breadcrumbs. Then at this point, I added some very cold water. If I had to estimate, I would say maybe a couple of tablespoons. You really don't want to overdo it so that the dough isn't too wet, and you want to add just enough so your dough isn't too dry and crumbly. As you start kneading the dough by hand, you will be able to tell just by the texture whether it's going to hold together or not, and then you can just sort of adjust as you go. So if it's feeling too dry and crumbly, add a tiny bit of water to bring it together, and if it's not and it's feeling too wet, just add a little bit more flour and incorporate that in. I was pretty happy with how mine turned out. I kneaded it just a little bit, couple of seconds, and then I wrapped it up in some cling film, flattened it out slightly because we are going to be rolling it out anyway, so I just wanted to give myself a bit of a head start. And then I placed it in the fridge while I got on with the rest of the recipe. I would say as long as it's in there for at least half an hour, you're good to go. You want it to be nice and chilled before baking so that you get that nice flaky crust. I grabbed my apples at this point and started peeling them. You can do this without peeling the apples, but cooked apple skin does have a tough leathery texture to it. Still, I mean, if you want the extra fiber and you don't mind the taste of cooked apple skin, then just leave it on and save yourself the time. But I wanted to peel mine, so I went ahead and peeled all the apples in the bowl. I ended up using about 10 apples. Then I cut them into wedges, making sure to take out the core and the seeds and all of that stuff. I wasn't too precious about them being super thin or anything like that. In fact, I wanted them to have a bit of a bite to them. I went ahead and sliced all of the apples, which took quite a bit of time but was very satisfying once it was done. And then I put them all into a big bowl ready to add a few extra ingredients, such as the juice from one lemon. Now the lemon juice does two things. First of all, it stops the apples from turning brown, and second, it gives a bit of a tart flavour. The Granny Smith apples are already quite tart, but the lemon juice definitely enhances that. It's nice how it kind of balances out the sweetness from the sugar in this recipe. I gave everything a good mix and added some granulated sugar. Then I added some mixed spice, which is basically a combination of things like cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves, all of those warm spices that you associate with apple pie and guaranteed to make your home smell amazing. And then I added a bit of corn flour. What this does is that when the apples produce any juice while cooking, it will thicken up thanks to the corn flour. I went ahead and mixed all of this together, being very gentle not to break the apple pieces apart. I found that going in with my hands made it a little bit easier to coat all the apple pieces. Once I was done with the filling, it was time to work on the crust. My dough chilled really nicely in the fridge, and I just went ahead and cut it into a 1/3 piece and a 2/3 piece, just a rough estimate. The 2/3 piece will be for the base of the pie, and I set aside the 1/3 piece, which will be the cover of the pie. I gave the dough a little quick knead to bring it all together, but not too much because I don't want to create too many gluten strands. I wanted the crust to turn out nice and flaky. I rolled it out as thinly as I could. I can't really tell you how many inches approximately, but you can see I rolled it out as flat as I could and large enough to fit into a 10-inch pan. I put it into the tin and tucked the dough into the corners. My tip for doing this is to lift the dough from the outside rather than just going straight in there with your fingers into the corners. Otherwise, you might tear the dough apart. So just lift the flaps around the edges and push it in gently, and that's pretty much it. I was really happy with this because it covered the tin really well with enough leftover hanging over the edge. Next, I used a fork to make some holes in the bottom of the crust. This process is called docking, and it allows steam to escape so that the crust stays nice and flat rather than puffing up during the bake. I rolled the top piece for the pie. You can see I actually took off a tiny little bit to the side, and this was to use for decoration just in case I felt like adding some extra details to the pie. I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do with it, but you just never know if inspiration is going to hit, so I just set a little chunk to the side. The dough felt quite dry, probably because I left it sitting out on the counter, and really I should have used a napkin or something to cover it while I rolled out the first piece. So I added a tiny drop of water, squeezed it together, and it was completely fine. Again, I rolled it out nice and thin into a circle, large enough to cover the top of my pie, and set it aside once I was happy with it. I cleaned my countertop and then I got ready to add my filling into the apple pie. I grabbed my apples and I was thinking of arranging them one at a time, but then I decided to simply add them in handfuls and just use my fingers to arrange them in there. Essentially, you just want to fill in all the gaps as well as you can. It's going to seem like a lot of apples and you're going to wonder if you can even fit everything in there, but you just have to trust the process. I added some juice from the bottom of the bowl, like a couple of tablespoons, and just drizzled that over the top for extra flavor. Don't forget that we have all of those spices and that lovely lemon juice, so you don't want it all to go to waste. You can even turn the leftover juice into a syrup if you want by heating it up in a saucepan. I folded and pinched the edges together, removing any obvious bulky excess. I wasn't too precious or particular about the style of crimping, I just wanted it to be sealed. I used a knife to create some vents on the top. These slits will allow any steam to escape. Then I decided to do a simple decoration. I used a pipe and tip to cut out little circles that I used to dot around the edge. Here's a close-up so you can see. Nothing too fancy, but it does a good job of covering up any imperfections in the crust. I also created some little details to put on top as well. Then I mixed some maple syrup with a bit of water, about 2 tablespoons of maple syrup to 1 tablespoon of water. And I don't have a pastry brush, I really do need to get one, but I used a spoon to drizzle it over the top of the pie. And off camera, I actually just went in with my fingers to spread it out a bit more. I knew from experience that this would give the crust a nice golden brown colour. I put the pie in the oven and left it in there for about an hour, or maybe I should say like an hour and 10 minutes, something like that. I just kept an eye on it to make sure it wasn't burning. I had preheated my oven to 160 degrees Celsius, although in the last 10 minutes I think I bumped it up to 200 degrees Celsius just to see if I could get a little extra colour. And I was really happy with how it turned out. I mean, it's really rustic and it's not perfect by any means, but to be honest, it tasted amazing. I had it with some vegan vanilla ice cream, and I don't know if you can tell through the screen, but the crust came out super flaky. The filling cooked really nicely, the apple chunks did not disintegrate in any way, so I still got a really nice bite of the apple pieces. It was very hard to get a clean cut crust section of the pie to show you, and that was because the crust really was that flaky, but it was all about the taste for me. Apple pie is great with custard as well, but I'm more of an apple pie and ice cream person. Let me know which one you prefer in the comments below. Overall, I was so proud of my attempt. Let me know what you think of the results. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!